The Zephyrian Galactic Empire had been conquering worlds for 3,000 years. Their shiny crystal warships had destroyed entire civilizations without breaking a sweat. 10,000 star systems bowed before their might. Every alien race they encountered either surrendered immediately or got wiped out within days. Commander Velthanor stood in the war room of their massive flagship, staring at a glowing map of space. His assistant pointed to a tiny dot on the edge of their territory, a small blue planet spinning around an ordinary yellow sun. "We call it Sol 3, sir," the assistant said. "The creatures living there call their world Earth. About 8 billion of them crawling around down there. Their technology is laughable. They still use chemical rockets and basic fusion power. Probably haven't even figured out faster-than-light travel yet." The other commanders in the room started laughing. Fleet Admiral Mordak, a veteran who had personally overseen the destruction of 50 worlds, shook his head in amusement. "Sounds like another easy farming planet. We'll be done in 3 days, maybe less. Just another species to add to our slave worlds." But Intelligence Officer Colvera wasn't laughing. She kept reading through the data they had collected about these humans, and something bothered her. "Admiral, there's something strange about these creatures. Looking at their history, they've been fighting wars against each other for thousands of years, constantly. They never seem to stop killing each other." Mordak waved his hand dismissively. "Who cares? Primitive savages fighting with sticks and stones. Deploy the 47th Subjugation Fleet. Let's get this over with." The Zephyrian war machine moved into action. Hundreds of their crystal ships appeared at the edge of the human solar system like deadly ghosts. They immediately sent out their standard message, the same one they had broadcast to countless worlds before. "Surrender now or face complete destruction. You have 24 hours to respond." They expected the usual response, either immediate surrender or panicked begging for mercy. What they got instead was something completely different. 12 hours later, a transmission came through. But it wasn't from the blue planet Earth. Instead, it came from a beat-up human spaceship that was limping through space near the giant planet Jupiter. The ship looked like it had been through hell. Metal plates welded over holes, scorch marks across its hull, and engines that were barely working. On the screen appeared a human male with scars across his face and tired eyes that had seen too much fighting. He looked directly into the camera with no fear whatsoever. "I am Captain Park Hyunwoo of the Earth Defense Corps," the human said in a calm, steady voice. "6 months ago, our deep space sensors picked up your scout ships poking around our system. We sent you a message then. We told you to run. We warned you to stay away. You should have listened to us." The transmission cut off. For a moment, the Zephyrian bridge was completely silent. Then something impossible happened. The human ship exploded. But this wasn't an accident or a malfunction. The explosion was deliberate, controlled, and devastating. Captain Park Hyunwoo had deliberately overloaded his ship's nuclear reactor, turning his vessel into a massive bomb. The explosion was so powerful that it completely destroyed 2 Zephyrian destroyers that had moved in too close. Colvera stared at her instruments in shock, her hands shaking as she read the data. "Sir, that was just a mining ship, a converted cargo hauler. And the explosion, they turned their own reactor into a weapon. He killed himself just to take out 2 of our ships." The silence on the bridge stretched on and on. For 3,000 years, the Zephyrian Empire had conquered world after world. They had faced desperate last stands, final battles, and dying civilizations. But they had never encountered anything like this. Most species, when faced with overwhelming force, would surrender, or at least try to negotiate. Some would fight back with whatever weapons they had. But no species had ever responded to their arrival by immediately sacrificing their own people in suicide attacks. Admiral Mordak stared at the expanding cloud of debris where the human ship had been. "What kind of creatures are we dealing with?" he whispered. The answer would come soon enough, and it would shake the Zephyrian Empire to its very core. They had expected to find another weak farming world full of primitive aliens who would grovel for mercy. Instead, they had discovered something far more dangerous, a species that had been forged in the fires of constant warfare, creatures who viewed death in battle not as a tragedy, but as an acceptable price for protecting their home. The humans had tried to warn them. They had sent a message 6 months earlier, telling the Zephyrian scouts to leave their system alone. The Empire's leadership had ignored that warning, dismissing it as the empty threats of a primitive species. Now, as the first drops of human blood mixed with alien metal in the cold vacuum of space, the Zephyrians were beginning to realize they had made a terrible mistake. They had poked a sleeping dragon, and now it was waking up. The war for Earth was about to begin, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Battle of Mars orbit was supposed to be easy. The Zephyrian Empire had done this dance 1,000 times. Before, show up with overwhelming force, destroy a few ships to make a point, and watch the enemy surrender. 18 hours later, their entire understanding of warfare had been shattered. What started as a routine conquest turned into the bloodiest battle in Zephyrian history. The humans didn't fight like any species the Empire had ever encountered. They didn't retreat when outnumbered. They didn't surrender when their shields failed. They didn't even try to negotiate when their weapons ran out of ammunition. Instead, they did something that defied all military logic. They turned every single ship into a weapon. Converted cargo ships that should have been hauling ore and supplies came screaming out of the asteroid belt, their hulls packed with explosives. These weren't military vessels. They were mining haulers and freight runners that had been hastily fitted with whatever weapons the humans could find. But instead of trying to fight a traditional battle, the humans used them as guided missiles. Massive Zephyrian battlecruiser, the pride of the 47th Fleet, found itself under attack by what looked like a garbage scow. The human pilot didn't even bother firing weapons. He just aimed his ship directly at the cruiser's engine section and hit full throttle. The collision tore both ships apart in a brilliant explosion that lit up the Martian sky. Civilian shuttles that normally ferried passengers between space stations now carried nothing but explosives and desperate volunteers. These small craft were so tiny that the Zephyrian sensors barely registered them as threats. By the time the alien gunners realized what was happening, the shuttles were already diving into their engine nacelles and reactor cores. Lieutenant Commander Kim Soo-jin was flying one of the few actual military fighters Earth had managed to deploy. Her small craft had been patched together from spare parts, and half her instruments were dead. Her left wing had been torn off by plasma fire, and fuel was leaking from her tanks, leaving a glowing trail behind her as she spun through the debris field. Through her cracked helmet visor, she could see the chaos of battle all around her. Human ships were dying everywhere, but each one took at least one Zephyrian vessel with them. The space around Mars was filled with the twisted wreckage of both fleets, glowing metal cooling in the vacuum. That's when she saw her brother's ship. Kim Tae-hyun commanded the last surviving human frigate, a small warship that had already taken massive damage. Its hull was breached in a dozen places, and one of its main engines was completely gone. But instead of retreating or trying to escape, Tae-hyun was pointing his ship directly at the massive Zephyrian flagship. "Tae-hyun, your engines are going critical," Soo-jin screamed into her radio. "Get out of there! Eject now!" Her brother's voice came back calm and steady, like he was discussing the weather. "Tell Dad I remembered his lessons about persistence. Hunting. Some prey you chase until they can't run anymore." Those were the last words Kim Tae-hyun ever spoke. His frigate accelerated directly into the Zephyrian flagship's shield array. The impact created a massive explosion that overloaded the shields and sent a chain reaction through 3 more enemy vessels. In one brilliant flash, Tae-hyun had single-handedly crippled 4 of the Empire's most powerful warships. Soo-jin watched her brother die and felt something cold settle in her chest. Enemy fighters were closing in on her position, their weapons charging for the kill. She could eject and hope for rescue, or she could follow her brother's example. The choice was easy. She activated the explosive charge built into her flight suit, a last resort weapon that every human pilot carried. She would not be taken prisoner. She would not give the aliens the satisfaction of capturing her alive. If she was going to die, she would take some of them with her. On the bridge of the Zephyrian command ship, Intelligence Officer Colvera stared at her instruments in complete disbelief. The numbers on her screen couldn't be right. They had to be some kind of malfunction. "Admiral," she said, her voice shaking, "we've lost 47 vessels. Casualties are over 12,000 dead and wounded." Admiral Mordak's skin had turned pale, his scales dulled with shock. Against what? Mining equipment and cargo haulers, how is that possible? Before anyone could answer, their communications officer interrupted. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the human planet. The main screen flickered to life, showing a middle-aged human woman wearing a simple military uniform. She had graying hair and tired eyes, but her voice was steady and strong. I am President Lee Min-jung of the United Earth Government, she said. The fleet you just fought was composed entirely of volunteers, miners, freight pilots, and retirees who answered the call to defend their home. Our actual military forces are still mobilizing and will be ready for deployment within 72 hours. The bridge fell completely silent. Volunteers? The humans had just inflicted more casualties on the Zephyrian Empire than any enemy in the last 500 years, and they weren't even using their real military. President Lee continued speaking. You have 72 hours to withdraw your forces beyond Neptune's orbit. If you refuse, we will demonstrate why Earth is classified as a death world. This is your only warning. The transmission ended, leaving the Zephyrian command staff staring at a blank screen. Colvera's voice was barely a whisper. Admiral, what's a death world? Nobody had an answer. But as they looked out at the wreckage floating around Mars, the twisted metal that had once been 47 proud Zephyrian warships, they were beginning to understand that they had stumbled into something far beyond their experience. The humans had just taught the galaxy's greatest military power a lesson in warfare, and according to their president, the real fight hadn't even started yet. Intelligence Officer Colvera spent 3 sleepless days digging through the deepest archives of the Zephyrian Empire. What she found in those dusty digital files would change everything the Empire thought it knew about warfare, survival, and the creatures they had decided to attack. The Galactic Survey Corps had been cataloging dangerous worlds for over 1,000 years. Every planet was given a threat rating based on how hostile the environment was to life. Most worlds rated between level 1 and level Phi, basically safe places where civilizations could develop peacefully. A few extreme worlds rated level 7, or the 8, places so dangerous that most species avoided them entirely. Earth was rated level Limtithi. Colvera had never even heard of a level Duthin rating before. She had to dig through ancient classification manuals just to understand what it meant. When she finally found the definition, her blood turned cold. She called an emergency meeting of the War Council and read the files out loud. Death World. Classification Level 2. Sol 3 Designation Earth. This is a warning to all galactic civilizations. The inhabitants of this world evolved under extreme selective pressure. Every biome contains apex predators. The dominant species' survival has depended on constant competition and environmental adaptation for millions of years. The room fell silent as she continued reading. Additional warning. This species has never experienced true peace. Their entire recorded history consists of warfare, conquest, and survival against impossible odds. The files contained intercepted human communications that painted a terrifying picture. These weren't just fragments of recent military chatter. They were historical records spanning thousands of years, wars that consumed entire continents and killed hundreds of millions, weapons powerful enough to destroy their own planet multiple times over. Most disturbing of all, human children were taught military tactics and strategic thinking as games and entertainment. General Yolthek, who had personally conquered over 100 worlds in his military career, studied the combat footage from the Mars battle. He watched human pilots making split-second decisions that would save their comrades while ensuring their own deaths. He analyzed their attack patterns, their coordination, their absolute refusal to retreat even when facing impossible odds. Look at their reaction times, he said, his voice filled with professional respect and growing fear. These aren't just soldiers willing to die for their cause. They're trained for it from birth. Every single one of them thinks like a career. Military officer, their farmers fight like our elite commandos. Colvera nodded grimly and continued reading from the files. It gets much worse. According to the biological surveys, Earth's dominant species are what the scientists call persistence hunters. Their ancestors literally evolved to chase prey across vast distances until the target collapsed from exhaustion. They developed the ability to run for hours without stopping, to track wounded animals for days, to never give up once they decided something needed to die. The implications hit everyone in the room at the same time. The humans hadn't just decided to fight the Zephyrian Empire, they had decided to hunt them. And according to millions of years of evolution, humans never stopped hunting until their prey was dead. But the most disturbing intelligence was still coming in from their deep space reconnaissance. Earth's industrial capacity was unlike anything the Empire had ever encountered. Most civilizations built their economies around trade, agriculture, and peaceful development. Earth's entire industrial base had been designed to supply constant global warfare. Factories that had been producing cars, computers, and household goods were converting to military production with terrifying efficiency. Assembly lines that had been making children's toys were now churning out ammunition. Shipyards that built cargo vessels were launching warships. The humans were mobilizing their entire civilization for war, and they were doing it faster than any species in galactic history. "Sir?" a young aide reported, his voice trembling with fear. "Our deep space sensors are picking up massive heat signatures throughout their solar system. They're building something. Lots of somethings. The energy readings suggest massive construction. Projects on every planet, every moon, every asteroid." Admiral Mordak stared at the tactical display showing the human solar system. 3 days ago, it had looked like a primitive backwater with a few small settlements. Now it was lighting up like a weapons factory. Each new heat signature represented another shipyard, another weapons plant, another piece of humanity's war machine coming online. "How many ships are they building?" he asked quietly. The aide checked his instruments again. "Sir, at current construction rates, they'll have more vessels than our entire invasion fleet within 2 weeks, and the rate is still accelerating." The silence in the war room was deafening. The Zephyrian Empire had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years by carefully calculating the strength of their enemies and deploying overwhelming force. But how do you calculate the strength of a species that turns their entire civilization into a weapon? General Yolthek spoke what everyone was thinking. "We're not fighting a military. We're fighting an entire species that was born for war." "Admiral." Mordak stared at the growing constellation of lights in the human system and whispered the question that would haunt the Empire's leadership. "What have we awakened?" The answer came 3 days later, when human strike teams materialized like ghosts across 17 different Zephyrian worlds simultaneously. These weren't random attacks or desperate raids. They were surgical strikes carried out with precision. That suggested the humans had been planning this operation for months. Military bases that had never been breached were infiltrated without triggering a single alarm. Communication centers went dark in perfect coordination. Supply depots exploded in carefully timed sequences that maximized damage while minimizing civilian casualties. The humans weren't just fighting back, they were hunting, and their prey was the entire Zephyrian Empire. The hunt begins. Deep in the darkness of space, something had changed. The humans were no longer running, they were hunting. Colonel Hanjiwu moved like a ghost through the Zephyrian military base. Her footsteps made no sound on the metal floors. Her breathing was controlled, silent. Years of training had turned her into something the aliens had never seen before, a perfect predator. The base commander never heard her coming. One moment he was reviewing supply reports at his desk. The next he felt cold steel against his throat. Han's voice was calm, almost friendly, as she spoke in his own language. "I need your communication codes," she said. "Give them to me and you live. Refuse and, well..." She pressed the blade a little deeper. Around the command center, 11 other humans had appeared from nowhere. Each one held a weapon pointed at a different alien officer. They had moved in perfect coordination, like wolves surrounding their prey. The Zephyrians had been so confident in their security that they never saw it coming. The base commander's hands shook as he entered the codes. Within seconds, every military installation on the planet went dark. Communication networks crashed. Defense systems shut down. Emergency lights flickered and died. This same scene was happening across the galaxy. Teams of human soldiers calling themselves the Terran Reapers struck simultaneously at hundreds of targets. They moved through alien space like shadows, appearing where they were least expected, vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. The psychological impact was immediate and terrifying. On Zephyr Prime, the Empire's capital world, Minister Kolveth arrived at his office to find something that made his blood freeze. A human combat knife was buried deep in his expensive wooden desk. Attached was a simple note written in perfect Zephyrian script. "We know where you sleep. We know where your family lives. We are watching. Lieutenant Park Dong-hyuk, Earth Special. Forces?" The minister called for his guards, but they were already dead. The humans had been in his private office, could have killed him easily, but chose not to. The message was clear. "We can reach you anywhere, any time." Panic spread through Zephyrian society like wildfire. Civilians packed their belongings and fled to systems deeper in the Empire's interior. Parents kept their children inside. Government officials hired armies of bodyguards. Supply convoys that once traveled with minimal protection now required full military escorts just to move food and medical supplies. The aliens had learned to fear the dark. Captain Cho Min-ho led his Reaper team through the ventilation shafts of a massive orbital shipyard. The facility was the size of a small city, floating in space above a gas giant. Hundreds of Zephyrian warships were under construction here, vessels that would eventually be used to attack more human colonies. Min-ho's mission was elegant in its simplicity. He didn't need to destroy the shipyard. He just needed to make sure nothing would launch from here for the next 6 months. A few small explosive charges placed in exactly the right spots would cause the reactor control systems to malfunction. To outside observers, it would look like accidents, terrible industrial disasters caused by poor maintenance and bad luck. "Earth Control, this is Shadow 7, he whispered into his communication device. His voice was barely audible even to his own team members. "Package delivered, estimate 18-month delay in their construction schedule." The response came back immediately. "Understood, Shadow 7, return home." But Min-ho knew that home might be a long way off. Most Reaper teams were operating behind enemy lines with no support, no backup, and no extraction plan. They were volunteers who had accepted that they probably wouldn't survive their missions. The only thing that mattered was completing the objective. Back on Earth, deep beneath the bustling city of Seoul, Admiral Song Hye-jin coordinated what she called the Invisible War. The command bunker was a marvel of human engineering, hidden, so far underground that even nuclear weapons couldn't reach it. The walls were lined with holographic displays, showing human operations across half the galaxy. Each glowing dot on the star maps represented a team of soldiers operating in enemy territory. Green dots meant mission successful. Yellow meant mission in progress. Red meant the team was compromised or destroyed. As Song watched, dots changed color constantly, some from yellow to green, others from yellow to red. She studied the patterns, looking for weaknesses in the Zephyrian defenses that her teams could exploit. The aliens were starting to adapt, but they were always one step behind. They were fighting a conventional war against an enemy that refused to play by conventional rules. "Ma'am," her aide reported, checking his communication screen, "the Zephyrians are requesting negotiations. They want to discuss terms for ending hostilities." Song's smile was cold as winter. The aliens had destroyed Mars, killed millions of innocent humans, and now they wanted to talk. Now that they were afraid, they suddenly wanted peace. "Tell them, we're just getting started," she said. "Launch Phase 2. Phase 2 had been years in preparation. While the Zephyrians thought Earth was defenseless, human shipyards hidden in asteroid fields and deep space had been working around the clock. They hadn't built ships for exploration or trade. They had built ships for one purpose only: the complete destruction of anything that threatened human survival. These weren't the elegant vessels of the old Earth Navy. These were weapons of war designed by people who had seen their homes burned and their families killed. Each ship carried the name of someone lost at Mars: the destroyer Kim Tai-hyun, the battlecruiser Park Hyun-woo, the carrier Kim Soo-jin. The first battle group emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Zephyrian territory. 30 ships, their hulls black as space itself, their weapons charged and ready. They moved in perfect formation, like sharks sensing blood in the water. The hunt had begun, and humanity had become the apex predator of the galaxy. The warning. The space station Haven floated silently in the void between star systems, its crystal walls gleaming like diamonds against the darkness. For thousands of years, this ancient structure had served as neutral ground where different species could meet and resolve their conflicts peacefully. The Keepers, a mysterious race that had vanished long ago, had built it as a gift to the galaxy, a place where wars could end with words instead of weapons. But today was different. Today, Haven would witness something that had never happened in its long history, the surrender of a galactic empire. Colvera walked slowly through the station's corridors, her footsteps echoing in the vast, empty spaces. Once, she had been part of the mighty Zephyrian War Council, helping to plan the conquest of primitive worlds. Now she was the only member of that council still alive. The others had died in the past year, picked off one by human assassins, who struck like ghosts and vanished without a trace. Behind her, visible through the station's transparent walls, hung the remnants of the Zephyrian fleet. These ships had once been the terror of the galaxy, capable of reducing entire planets to ash. Now they looked broken, defeated. Their crews were traumatized by a year of fighting an enemy, unlike anything they had ever faced. The humans had turned every advantage against them. Superior technology. The humans had captured it and improved upon it. Numerical superiority. The humans had made numbers irrelevant through tactics so brutal and efficient that Zephyrian commanders refused to sleep at night. Home field advantage? The humans had made the Zephyrians afraid to return to their own worlds. The negotiation chamber was simple. Just a round table in a room with walls that showed the stars beyond. Admiral Song Hae-jin sat waiting, looking surprisingly ordinary. She was of average height with a modest build, nothing about her appearance that screamed danger. Next to her sat Colonel Han Ji-woo and Captain Cho Min-ho, the same humans who had led the terror campaigns that brought the Empire to its knees. This, Colvera realized, had been their fatal mistake. The Zephyrians had looked at humans and seen weak, primitive creatures barely worthy of attention. They had never imagined that these unremarkable beings could bring down a civilization that had ruled the galaxy for centuries. Terms, Song said, without any greeting or ceremony. She slid a data crystal across the smooth table surface. Complete withdrawal from the Sol system, 50 light-year buffer zone around all human space, reparations for Earth casualties, non-aggression pact with verification protocols. Colvera's hands trembled as she examined the crystal's contents. She had expected demands for total surrender, for the dissolution of their government, for tribute that would bankrupt their worlds. Instead, she found terms that were almost reasonable, generous even. "Why?" she whispered, her voice barely audible in the quiet room. "You could demand our unconditional surrender. Your capabilities clearly exceed anything we can field. You could take our worlds, our resources, everything we have." Song's expression remained unchanged, but there was something in her eyes, not cruelty or hatred, but a kind of tired determination. "Because we're not conquerors," Song said simply. "We're survivors. We don't want your worlds, we just want to be left alone to build ours." Colvera gestured toward the data showing the human attacks across Zephyrian space. "But the attacks, the sabotage operations across our territory. Our people are terrified to leave their homes." Captain Cho leaned forward, his voice calm and matter-of-fact. "That was our proportional response. You threatened our home, so we demonstrated why that was inadvisable. Consider it an educational experience." The words hit Colvera like a physical blow. She stared at the humans across the table, trying to process what she was hearing. "You were holding back?" she asked in disbelief. Song's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Perhaps amusement, or maybe pity. "Earth has been preparing for extinction-level threats since we developed nuclear weapons," Song explained. "Everything you've seen, our industrial capacity, our military doctrine, our willingness to sacrifice everything for survival, That's just our normal state of readiness. We've been at war with ourselves for so long that external enemies are actually easier to handle. The Admiral paused, letting the implications sink in. We know how to fight total war because we've been doing it for centuries. Against each other, against our environment, against extinction itself. What you experienced wasn't our full capability. It was just us defending our home. Colvera signed the treaty with claws that shook so badly she could barely hold the stylus. But as she prepared to leave, Song spoke again. "One more thing," the human admiral said quietly. "We're going to share this engagement data with the Galactic Council. Other species need to understand what they're dealing with if they ever consider threatening a death world." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Any other civilization thinking about following in Zephyria's footsteps would know exactly what to expect. The humans weren't just ending this war, they were preventing future ones through the most effective deterrent possible: fear. As the Zephyrian delegation prepared to depart, Colvera found herself compelled to ask one final question. Something had been bothering her throughout the entire conflict. "Admiral, your message said you told us to run. When did you send this warning?" For the first time during the entire meeting, Song smiled. It wasn't a cruel expression or a mocking one. It was almost sad, as if she genuinely regretted what had happened. "Our deep space monitoring stations detected your survey ships 8 months before you attacked," she said. "We sent a simple message to your government. We are a death world species. We do not seek conflict, but we will not avoid it. We suggest you find easier prey." Your leadership apparently decided we were bluffing. Colvera felt her legs go weak. 8 months. They had known for 8 months and had tried to warn them. The Zephyrian War Council had received that message and dismissed it as primitive bravado. They had laughed at the idea that such a young species could threaten their ancient empire. As the meeting ended and the delegations prepared to part ways, Song's final words would be recorded and transmitted across the galaxy. They would be carved into memorial walls on a dozen worlds, studied by military academies, and whispered by parents to children as a warning about the dangers of pride and overconfidence. "We told you to run," the human admiral said quietly. "Next time, listen." Those words would echo through galactic history, a simple message that every species would eventually understand. Death world inhabitants don't make idle threats. When they tell you to run, you run. The age of human isolation was over. The galaxy had learned what Earth's children were capable of, and that knowledge would change everything.